Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating political chess match that went down during Thailand's 2006 crisis. If you've ever wondered what happens when democracy, the monarchy, and constitutional law just totally collide, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to systematically break down a historical moment that honestly completely defied conventional political logic, relying directly on the detailed analysis by Michael K. Connors. So the entire source text we're looking at revolves around this one incredibly provocative question. Can a democracy actually be saved by a king? The author presents us with this massive paradox. Back in the 2005 and 2006 crisis in Thailand, there was this movement of self-described pro-democracy liberals who were actively seeking an extra-constitutional, extra-democratic intervention from the Thai monarchy. They wanted the king to step in and, actually, scratch that, they were literally demanding that the king step in and remove an elected leader. Now, to understand why on earth a group of liberals would abandon the ballot box to beg for royal intervention, we really have to look closely at the very specific flavor of liberalism that developed in Thailand. Here's how we're going to break this down today. We'll start with A, Thai democratic paradox, then move to defining royal liberalism, look at the Thaksin challenge, explore invoking Article 7, and finally, the king says no. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, a Thai democratic paradox, the 2005-2006 crisis. Okay, imagine the streets of Bangkok between 2005 and 2006. You'd see this absolute sea of protesters, many of them wearing pro-monarchist yellow t-shirts, rallying around a very specific slogan. They were demanding to, quote, return the royal powers. And as the author points out, any plausible account of these protests really has to understand that this wasn't just, blind worship. It was a highly calculated, rational strategy by political actors who were mobilizing against Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. They claimed to be acting as liberal Democrats, fighting to save the country from an authoritarian elected leader, but, and here's the catch, their chosen method was to demand that the king oust that prime minister. Moving to Section 2, defining royal liberalism. A unique ideology. At the very heart of this ideology is a unique Thai term, rachaprachasamasai. The author explains that this roughly translates to the joint sovereignty, or the mutuality between the king and the people. This idea was promoted heavily back in the 1970s by prominent intellectuals and politicians, and it basically suggests that the king and the people are mutually dependent. They stand together against corrupt, predatory elites or bureaucrats. So in this worldview, ultimate sovereignty doesn't just rest solely with the people in a simple majority rules kind of way. Instead, the monarchy acts as a moral exemplar and a guardian of the public good, basically sharing sovereignty with the citizens. And Thai liberals anchor this whole philosophy in this really fascinating ancient myth involving King Ramkhamhaeng's bell from the late 13th century. The author details how historical inscriptions describe this ancient social contract. It went like this. If any citizen had a grievance or suffered an injustice, they could literally just walk up to the palace gates and ring a bell. The king would hear the call and personally dispense honest justice. Modern Thai liberals have used this exact story to frame the monarchy as the ultimate ombudsman. It's seen as a traditional, homegrown guarantor of liberties and rights, kind of like a Thai Magna Carta. That brings us to Section 3, the Thaksin challenge, a majoritarian threat. So this entire crisis was really defined by two fiercely competing claims to political legitimacy. On one side, you have Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. He rose to power in 2001 and claimed this massive majoritarian mandate. We're talking millions of votes, particularly from rural citizens. And he used that sheer numerical advantage to justify his policies. But then, on the other side, you have the Thai liberals and the urban elite. They argued that, hey, democracy is about way more than just majority rule. It requires checks, balances, and a strict adherence to the public good. When they felt Thaksin was violating those principles, they leaned incredibly hard on the moral authority of the monarchy to counter his millions of votes. The author spends a good chunk of time outlining exactly why Thaksin frustrated his opponents so deeply. See, Thailand had passed this widely celebrated reformist constitution in 1997, which was explicitly designed to create strong checks and balances, but Thaksin systematically bypassed them. Because he had this overwhelming parliamentary majority, he effectively evaded all scrutiny. The text notes he gained immense influence over the supposedly neutral Senate, and by doing that, he was able to neutralize independent agencies, places like the Election Commission and the Constitutional Court, just filling them with sympathetic figures. He even repoliticized the military through strategic appointments. To the liberals, Thaksin was basically building an authoritarian regime hiding behind the facade of electoral democracy.
It's a pretty stark reminder that a constitution is really only as strong as the institutions enforcing it. With his massive majority, Thaksin essentially short-circuited the entire system.
Now for Section 4, invoking Article 7, constitutional loophole. So the big question becomes, how do you stop a leader who controls all the legal checks and balances? Well, the protesters found their answer in Article 7 of that 1997 Constitution. This is a pretty vague legal clause that basically states, if a situation arises where no constitutional provision applies, the case should be decided based on constitutional practice in the democratic regime of government with the king as head of the state. The author explains that while the original drafters probably just intended this to cover minor legal blind spots, the anti-Thaksin forces interpreted it way more expansively. They literally saw it as a constitutional activation key for rachaprachasamasai, a perfectly legal way for the king to step in, dissolve the government, and completely reset the system. By early 2006, these protests had reached an absolute fever pitch. And then, in a truly surreal political moment, protest leader and media tycoon Sandi Limthongkol literally brought a massive bell on stage and rang it in front of the crowd. He was physically reenacting the ancient myth of King Ramkhamhaengam. By ringing that bell, he was symbolically petitioning the king to hear the grievances of the people, demanding the invocation of Article 7 to remove Thaksin right then and there. It was just this stunning, visible enactment of Thai royal liberalism in real time. Let's walk through the frantic timeline that really escalated this crisis, as mapped out by the author. In late January 2006, Thaksin's family sold their telecommunications empire, ShinCorp, to a Singaporean company. It was a highly controversial, tax-free mega deal that just triggered massive public outrage over alleged policy corruption. Facing immense street pressure, Thaksin suspends parliament on February 24th and calls a snap election. But the opposition? They flat out refused to play along. On March 23rd, the protest coalition, known as the PAD, officially issued a declaration demanding the king use Article 7 to appoint a new prime minister. Then, just days later, on April 2nd, the main opposition parties completely boycotted the snap election. And because of that boycott, the April election turned into a total farce. I mean, just look at the sheer scale of this, 10 million. During that April 2nd election, over 10 million citizens went to the polls and intentionally cast no votes. They literally checked the box to abstain or reject the sole candidates on the ballot. This created a massive constitutional gridlock because Parliament legally could not convene without filling all its seats, and many districts simply couldn't elect a candidate at all. The entire system was fundamentally broken. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the king says no, refusal to intervene. With the entire nation holding its breath, just waiting to see if the monarchy would intervene as requested, King Bhumibol Adulyadej Dej finally spoke on April 25th. He was addressing an assembly of judges. And the author highlights his definitive, uncompromising rejection of the protesters' strategy. The king stated very clearly regarding Article 7, it is not a rational call. He basically told the courts that it was way beyond the scope of his powers to simply appoint a government, and he firmly instructed the jurists to go and do their jobs to resolve the legal mess of the elections themselves. The other argues that the king's refusal completely politically disarmed the liberal protest movement. I mean, they'd bet everything on this myth of royal intervention. And when the king said no, the street movement essentially had to move to the sidelines. In the immediate aftermath, the Constitutional Court did step in and annulled the flawed April election. However, the underlying conflict didn't end. It just shifted. It moved from a civilian protest movement into the hands of elite networks, courts, and the military. And this, ultimately, is what culminated in the military coup d'etat of September 2006 that finally removed Thaksin from power. So we end today's explainer with the author's final, very provocative question. For decades, Thai political liberals had relied on this article of faith, that the monarchy was the ultimate safety valve, a guardian ready to protect democracy from authoritarian majorities. But when they actually tried to pull that safety valve in 2006, it failed to resolve the crisis on their terms. So moving forward, if royal liberalism cannot be relied upon to magically secure political order or fix democratic crises, what exactly will ground Thai democracy in the future? It's a profound question about the very nature of their social contract, and it leaves us with an awful lot to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me as we unpack this seriously complex history. And as always, keep questioning the structures around you.